So what are some of the problems that we have with Georgia's current electoral system? So there are issues with negativity and hyperpartisanship. Some people lose confidence in the system. A lot of voters feel unrepresented. There's something called vote splitting and strategic voting, which while you may or may not be familiar with those terms, I'm absolutely certain you've seen the effect of it. We've got an issue with maintaining the status quo that's dictated only by a small percentage of people. We often feel like we've got limited voter choice, especially during runoffs. And as we've mentioned briefly before, those runoffs that we get all the time, they're actually pretty costly and time consuming. So let's take a closer look at some of these. So with campaign civility and hyperpartisanship, about a year ago, we had probably the biggest focus runoff in the history of Georgia, if not the United States. I know I was very uncomfortable having the eyes of the entire country on just what was happening in our Senate election. And there were political ads going crazy at that point in time. Yes, political campaign ads are going worse. And during that campaign specifically, just that runoff a year ago in the 2020 elections into 2021 runoff, there are about 70% of the ads that ran during that runoff campaign were negative. And some of those ads ran almost 350 times a day. I mean, the impact that that has on our ability to talk to each other, mental health, just frustration levels is crazy. And we don't need that. So there's also some impact of how we vote on these elections. So real quick, I want to talk about this thing called plurality voting. If you're not as familiar with election systems, you might not know what this means, but basically it just means that whoever gets the most votes wins, regardless of how many that is. Sometimes they call it something called first past the post. It's mostly called plurality, but basically it means if you have 4 candidates as they had here, 32% voted for one person, everybody else got less, the 32% wins. That means that the vast majority of people didn't vote for that one candidate. That kind of is a problem because you wind up with a lot of people feeling unrepresented. If you have a lot of people that think similarly, but there are 2 candidates running that have similar platforms or similar ideals, you can wind up splitting those votes. And even if those are the majority, you can wind up with someone else winning. So this is where you bring in things like vote splitting and spoilers. You can have this term called being primaried, where this happens in the primary and then that impacts the general election. It's a big issue. Can limit voter choice because a lot of candidates wind up being afraid to run because they don't want to let the other guy win. You know, whoever their least favorite is, they don't want to win, want to let them win. The more candidates you have, the worse this winner takes all or plurality voting gets. I'm sure you've seen some of these campaigns we get in Georgia where there'll be like 8, 12, 14 people running for the same position. How in the world can you pick a winner from that? Oh yeah, we get the top 2 and then they go to a runoff, but you still have a whole lot of other choices and that becomes a real problem. And then we do get down to the point where it's past the primary and we've got our general election. Very often what happens is we get this limited voter choice. Now, I'm not going to ask the ones that are people that are here because on the video, nobody can see that anyway, but I will say that I know a lot of people. I try very hard to know people all the way from one side of the political spectrum to the other. And I can say that very few people that I knew on both sides of the aisle, either side or in the middle, were happy with the candidates they've had in the 2020 election. Most people really kind of hated them. But they picked them because they didn't want the other guy to win. So think about it for yourself. Would you have preferred someone else other than the candidate you had a choice of in the last election? Well, yeah, some people might say there was actually another choice. There was a libertarian. And we have third parties. Sometimes there's a Green Party candidate, sometimes libertarian, sometimes something else, an independent. And for those people who considered or actually did vote for Jo Jorgensen, they wind up being accused of the spoiler effect. I know that there are people, usually it depends on which party is considered closer to the third party as the one that gets accused, but they get angry. They get angry at somebody for voting for a third party, for voting their conscience, because they go, oh, you're taking votes away from our guy. That's not right. People should not be pressured to vote for something other than what their conscience dictates they want to vote for, just because the system is set up that it takes votes away from another party. So all of this can result in a loss of confidence in the system. And another thing that can also help with that loss of confidence in the system is, especially when you're talking about primaries and that plurality voting, is there's lots of people that vote early. But as we watch all the time, candidates drop out. And as candidates drop out, if someone voted early and they voted for one of those candidates that drop out, that's it. That vote's wasted. There is no other option. That person can't vote again. They didn't know when they cast their ballot that they were voting for somebody that wasn't there. And that causes people to be both unrepresented and to feel like it's not worth participating. A lot of voter apathy can happen with all those things of not having choices, not being able to choose who they want. So you wind up having fewer people participate in the system because they feel like it doesn't matter anyway. In the primaries, this is even another issue. We mentioned that term of being primaried. And similar, this isn't exactly what being primaried means, but one of the issues with primaries is very few voters actually turn out at the primaries. Okay, in Georgia, it's typically less than a third of voters, not less than a third of adults of voters. So you're not talking about a large percentage of people. And because many districts in Georgia are generally either red or blue, just historically, that small percentage of people selects basically who is going to win the general election. And that's another issue, because you've got the outcome being decided by just a few people instead of by all of the citizens, as it's supposed, the system is supposed to be, ideally, if it's working properly. So let's talk real briefly about runoffs. Now, it costs money to run an election, right? So when we do a runoff, we're basically doing that again twice. So how much do these elections cost? We are actually at Better Ballot Georgia. We've got a team, our policy and research team is trying to find out exactly what runoffs cost. It's a lot more complicated process than you might think. But one number we were able to get is that famous runoff on January 5th, 2021, cost Fulton County about $6 million for the runoff alone. And that's just one of, if I remember right, 151 counties in Georgia. That is a lot of money that can be used on all sorts of other projects if we didn't have to run these runoffs again. Not to mention that turnout at runoffs is much lower. It's harder for people to get out twice. There's all sorts of reasons why that might be, but generally on average, the 2021 runoff for the 2020 election was an exception. But most of the time you have 30 to 50% fewer people come out to vote at the runoff than did at the regular election. This means that Thank you for the correction, Clara, 159 counties. So it's even more money, though I will say that the smaller counties and cities, they don't spend as much as $6 million. Fulton County's got a lot going on. But when it comes to voter turnout, the game then becomes not who is the most appropriate for the people, but which candidate can get more of their people to the polls. And that is a totally different game. And this is, I do need to find the reference for this again, but this is an issue that disproportionately impacts disadvantaged voters. Okay, you're going to find a bigger drop off in turnout among lower income, Black, Hispanic, and other people of color voters than you do in upper middle class, white voters. And that impacts the outcome of elections. So what is a solution? Instant runoff voting. It's also called ranked choice voting. So just to clarify, most of the United States talks about ranked choice voting. That is because most of the United States doesn't already have runoffs. Okay, so trying to talk about instant runoff, you'd have to first explain what a runoff was and then tell them about why that could happen instantaneously. Here in Georgia, we have runoffs already. So the public understands the idea of, oh, we're just doing that. We're just going to do it immediately instead of having to go back in what used to be 8 weeks and is now what used to be 9 weeks and is now 4 weeks. For the purposes of what we're working with in Georgia, they are interchangeable terms. So I do use those terms interchangeably through the presentation. So what is it? First of all, you just pick what's your favorite candidate. Most of us do that now, though there might be a lot of thought that goes into who do we think might win instead of just who do we like best. But you pick your candidate who you like best. Then you pick your candidate you like second best. And then the one third best, and however many choices the ballot allows you to have. You put those candidates on your ballot just like you would if you were ranking your favorite sports teams, wines, musicians, or songs, whatever. It's the same kind of thing. You just go ahead and rank those options and put it on the ballot. Then when it's tallied, this is how things get different. And as this were to occur, each round is publicized, so everything's transparent. So first of all, everybody's first choice is tallied up, just like a regular election, just as if they voted for one person. If a candidate has a majority, then we're done. Just like a regular election, nothing changes. If there's not a majority, then you get rid of everybody's last place the candidate who got the least votes overall. They get thrown out, and those voters that voted for that person, their second choice gets counted. And then you go around, retally, and if there's a majority winner now, great, you're done. And if not, you just keep going around that cycle until there's a clear 50% plus one or more winner. So how does it work? We're going to watch a real quick little video that shows this. It's a great way to explain it. So I'm just going to let you, it's like a minute long. So I'll just let you watch this.
Pick your favorite color.
The ranked choice voting way.
Instead of voting for just one color, you get to rank your top 3.
Well, purple is the best, but if I can't have purple, I want blue. And if neither of those wins, I guess I can live with orange.
Now, let's count up everybody's votes.
Under ranked choice voting rules, it's not enough just to get the most votes. You need a majority.
More than 50% of the votes.
Purple's ahead, but it has only 7 votes.
It needs at least 11 to win.
So we eliminate the color in last place.
Sorry, orange fans, we're going to your second choice.
2 more for green.
1 for purple.
But no color has 11 votes yet.
Still no majority.
Bye-bye,
blue.
1 more for purple.
4 for green.
And we have a winner.
The ranked choice voting way.
And that's it. It's that easy. You just go ahead and
Pick your favorite color.
that is not what I wanted to do. All right, sorry about that. So yeah, it is that easy. You just go ahead and rank them. They eliminate the lowest, and they do that until you've got a winner. So with New York City had just used ranked choice voting for the first time in a major election this past summer in 2021. And you can see here how that wound up turning out. So in this case, it did not change the outcome of the election. They still had Eric Adams win in the first round, and he still won in the last round. But you can see that a lot more people were now behind Eric Adams than they were at the beginning. And that it does actually happen probably from the data I've seen about 2/3 of the time. Whoever won the first round plurality winds up winning the last round. And that's okay. You know, we don't have to have it be different all the time. Sometimes the initial front runner doesn't win. In Oakland's mayoral race back in 2010, you could see that as they eliminated things, that's what those different colors are, is they eliminated different candidates and those votes got redistributed, that Don Parada had been in the lead in the first round, but wound up getting edged out over time, and Jean Quan eventually ended up the winner. So sometimes it changes how the votes occur. And you can see how in this one, there would have definitely been a spoiler. As I said, oftentimes you do wind up with that first front runner winning. So what are some benefits of instant runoff or ranked choice voting? It does result in greater voter turnout. Interestingly, you wind up with more minority and women representatives. You eliminate those costly runoffs, increase the number of choices we have for candidates, get rid of that spoiler effect, campaigns become more civil, and you reduce hyperpartisanship. So real briefly, we'll go through a bunch of these. They've done studies. In 2016, they found that there had been a 10-point higher voter turnout. So more people were showing up to the election. Some people do fear that ranking votes is complicated. And we found, they have found through studies that over 85% of people do use the rankings, they do understand them. And even a majority ranked all 5 candidates in this one Santa Fe study that they did. In New York City, similar results, 83% ranked multiple candidates, and 3/4 of all voters polled in New York City's first ranked choice voting election liked using it, and they want to use it again. That's a pretty good agreement. I think that's better agreement than we get on just about any other policy thing that happens in the United States. So here you can see that in California, they had a law go into effect where cities were able to start using ranked choice voting. And so they looked at before and after ranked choice voting was instituted, and cities that used it and cities that didn't. And in the cities that used it, there was a much greater increase in the number of people of color who ended up being elected versus those cities that did not adopt ranked choice voting. And this meant that those elected officials were now more closely resembling the people that they were representing. Similar thing happened with women on city councils. Beforehand, it was overwhelmingly men. Afterwards, became much closer to 50-50. Again, more closely resembling the constituents that the officials are representing. And you can see, here's just more data on that because I like data. You can see how it happened in different cities in California compared to the national average. So taking a quick closer look at that Oakland mayoral race we glanced at earlier, you can see how we got rid of the spoiler effect, because Jean Quan and Rebecca Kaplan were 2 opponents to Don Parada. if you look over time, what happened when we got to Rebecca Kaplan is apparently they were pretty similar in the people that liked them, because as you sorted and took the next choice for all of Rebecca Kaplan's voters, the majority of them preferred Jean Quan. And that's what made the difference. So in a regular plurality vote, that would have been a spoiler effect, but you eliminated that by using the ranked choice voting. So campaign civility, I think, is a benefit to everybody who could not use a little bit less negativity in their lives. And from the candidates themselves and the elected officials themselves, they have said that they had to change how they campaign, because instead of just what candidates very often do now is all they have to do is get you to think the other guy is worse than them. And I'm from the Northeast, so when I say guy, I mean, you know, genderless, I mean people. But with ranked choice voting, you can't just look at, well, they only have to pick one, so I just have to make sure they think everybody else is awful. You have to go, well, they might like that minor party candidate, but that minor party candidate probably won't win, so I'd better be their second choice, or at least their third choice. And so it changes how they run campaigns. You have to talk to everybody, in the words of Libby Schaaf, the mayor, a prior mayor of Oakland, because you have to appeal to more people than just your core base. So who thinks instant runoff voting is a good idea? Lots and lots of people. I'll just run through this super quick. Lots of universities are using it. There's over 90 currently, and that number's probably gone up because I think, well, this was from almost a year ago now, that Georgia State University joined those ranks in using instant runoff voting in their student council elections. Lots of politically active organizations on both sides of the aisle, non-partisan, you know, believe it's a good idea and that it helps the people. Non-partisan organizations, you know, of many different types, see the benefit to us, the electorate, and the people. And there's lots of individuals who also like it as well. And so you may be asking, is this new? And where is it used? Is it something we can trust and that's already been tried? And the answer is yes. In the United States, there's currently 27 states that either use or have enacted ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting. You'll notice Georgia is actually on that list. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And if you, okay, so United States, it's relatively new here, but it has been in use for over 10 years, as you could see from that one Oakland, Santa Fe election. New York City is the largest in the United States use of ranked choice voting thus far. That's a good thing because it gives it a good track record. You may have heard some issues around the New York City election. That has to do with other New York City election rules, not ranked choice voting itself. And if there are questions on that, we could talk a little bit more about that at the end. So before we go on to Georgia, I do want to mention that ranked choice voting has been in use in countries around the world, actually for much longer. There have been places that it's been used for over 100 years. Australia is one of those locations that has used ranked choice voting. I believe Ireland is another one, Malta. You know, so this is not a new concept. It's just new to us in Georgia. All right, so you noticed that Georgia was colored in on that map. And what happened is last year, you may have heard SB 202 passed. We're not going to talk about most of SB 202. There's a lot of controversial issues in it. But one thing that it did do was give instant runoff voting a toehold in Georgia. They went ahead and passed a mandate that all overseas, military overseas voters need to use instant runoff voting. And the reason they did that is because there used to be a mandate for 9 weeks between the election, the original election, and the runoff, because they needed to have time to mail those ballots back and forth. And by giving military voters an extra ballot where it's their instant runoff, it eliminated that. Just to clarify, it is not the way that instant runoff voting would run if we did it for the regular elections. Okay, it's a different thing. I'm not going to try to explain it because it might confuse people, but it is just an introduction. It's a toehold. Other than that, cities, counties, municipalities are not currently able to use instant runoff voting according to Georgia law. State law requires that simple plurality that we talked about, or runoff elections if nobody gets over 50%. And so we have to lean on the legislature needs to pass a law to allow cities to use it if they choose to. Okay. There are cities who are already passing resolutions that they want to use instant runoff voting if they're allowed to do so. Johns Creek, which is more Republican leaning, City of Atlanta, which is more Democratic leaning, both of them have passed resolutions saying, hey, Georgia legislature, if we're allowed to use instant runoff voting, we'd really like to do that. And if you write to your city council or county commissioner, they might learn a little bit more and think that's a good idea as well. So there may, I've heard rumor that there may be a bill dropping into this legislative session. And you could find out more about that at our meeting on Thursday night, January 27th at 7 o'clock on Zoom. You'll want to go and register. I can drop that in the chat for those people that are here live. And if it doesn't pass this go around, well, of course, we'll be trying again. But in the meantime, we can go ahead and talk to our legislatures or talk to our city councils, talk to our county commissions, and work on getting them familiar with the idea so that when a bill does pass, they'll already know about what instant runoff voting is. And we have been making progress with that. There is actually a number of other cities and counties that are looking at it right now, other than just Johns Creek in Atlanta. So yes, we know there are other problems with our electoral system. Gerrymandering is an issue. Ballot access is an issue. There's other issues around primaries. We know instant runoff voting can't solve all of them. Okay, just being totally honest, we can't solve everything. I think, in fact, I would distrust somebody who said they could solve everything with one change to the electoral system. So you might be wondering, why does it matter? If we can't change some of these very important issues, why is instant runoff voting important? And the reason is that it gives a foothold. It starts letting change happen. It starts bringing other voices to the table. It starts making some of those other reforms possible, where they may not be possible if everybody's so much on one side or the other that they can't even come to the table and talk about it. And that's really part of what instant runoff voting does, is it dials down the our way or the highway that both sides have gotten to a large extent at this point, and starts enabling some of those conversations, starts letting the people be more heard. Even if it doesn't change exactly who's elected right away, it starts bringing more options. They're going to start seeing how those ranked choices pan out and who the first choices were. So it's a foot in the door. It's an important step on the way to some of the other reforms that are needed. Oops. So you can see there are a lot of benefits to instant runoff ranked choice voting, lots of things that it could help us with. And if you also think that this is something that would be important, then we'd love to have your help. If you haven't already, please go and sign our petition. And you can join us also as a volunteer or donor. Don't have to volunteer a lot. We've got things people could show up at, a canvassing event or something, just a couple hours every month or every quarter if you want. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what may be happening in the legislature, join us Thursday night, the 27th. And if you know somebody who would like to see a presentation similar to this or shorter, if you need one shorter, let us know that as well.